Hold on, let me get a boogie tissue.
Every time I go live, the fucking guy walks away. This is why you can't keep a relationship, Josh. You just, as soon as things get tough, you just walk away.
What was that? I heard you say something.
No, I wasn't talking shit at all or anything.
I had the air conditioning running from like as soon as I got home from work on high at like 42 degrees. Fucking
42.
I had to put pants on. I had some joggers I'm like, God damn, it's cold in here. So, you ain't getting me today, Satan.
I was gonna make a some sort of completing suicide joke about hanging meat, and yeah,
I was just trying to preserve myself. That's why I had a lot of Chinese food for the salt.
You know, MSG and freezing cold weather. You know, you could have
MSG,
open casket.
You know me.
Months later. So is
so far so good, man.
So far so good.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard you crack since we got in here, but
all right. I guess if it gets jumpy like it did yesterday, just if it's
shout it out.
If it's really bad, yeah, shout it out, and then
you just for the record, as soon as you like not 10 seconds ago. So let's talk for 60 more seconds.
All right. Yeah. I notified work, and
okay.
Well, I can hear myself hear a computer somehow with your headphones on.
Right. I can try and turn my volume down. But
you have your you have your headphones on full blast?
No, not even close. It's on 24 out of 100.
Damn. I got you on pretty high though. But yeah, I was talking to work, and I'm like, hey, can you fix the webcam thing? And they were like, oh, you have a pretty old computer. It would be pretty hard. Can you just buy a new computer? I'm like, what?
This wasn't a problem before y'all came into my life.
I'm like, no. Also, like, you want me to be like, you want like this BS, like, FaceTime, like before actual FaceTime, like that's what they call it, oh, we want you to have FaceTime with the bosses or whatever. And it's just like, okay, well, if you want virtual FaceTime, you need to fix this. Like, you didn't even try to fix it. You just said, oh, it's old. Well, it's either try and fix it or just buy me a new laptop. Like, you're a multi-million-dollar company, and you're going to buy all new computers next year. If you just buy one now that I can use, you don't have to buy me one next year. It's same deal. So
it's like one of them every 5-year things.
Like basically, yeah. I'm like,
just in case, like,
yeah. So I don't know.
We shall see.
Did it skip at all that last minute?
Just it's so fucked up. Your whole sentence is fine, and then right when you said, "Did it get it's a bit bad?" So I don't know. I think we go, and then I'll just let you know. Because hello.
Yeah, I guess just let me know. Yeah, just let me know, and then as I definitely, because I listened back to it yesterday and it was pretty bad. I was like, oh, good thing.
Yeah. I will do my best judgment and fucking go from there, man.
All right.
And I got little bits and pieces on things, and I did a little bit more today, so we'll see how it goes, but I'm kind of running off of your script with you, brother. Just trying to find the correct times.
Yeah.
What I mean by correct times is times to jump in.
Yeah.
With information.
How now, brown cow? Welcome back to Revolutionary Roulette. I'm Rob Zielinski. You can find me on Twitter at Rob Zielinski. That's Zielinski. Follow the show on Instagram at Revolutionary Roulette, or you can email the show at revolutionaryroulette@gmail.com. And I'm joined, as always, by the co-host, Mr. Joshua Catlow.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you coming in for another week. We got some good information out there for you this week, especially Rob has some hard-hitting facts that I know he's been dying to throw at you. We'll just point at this. Yeah, right there. Is you and,
that's really good for the podcast version, yeah.
Yes. Oh fuck! I didn't even think about that. Visuals, idiot. Nobody even watches the stream.
Yeah, we've been up for 5 minutes and still no views. So finally, part 5, chapter 5, a kind of revolution. We're finally going to be able to wrap up the chapter. It took forever. Here we go. But before we get started, before we begin, I want to give a quick trigger warning for the next few minutes here. Some folks may need to skip ahead, and I'll give it a second here so you can do that. So, because I left it out of the script last week and we may not reference him again, I wanted to mention that for all of the Thomas Jefferson bullshit we discussed last week, I would be remiss if I didn't state that Jefferson was most likely a child rapist. And this isn't some conspiracy theory either. It's all right there on Monticello.org with a January of the year 2000 official report. This also isn't just some sort of sideswipe tangent. It's not in Zinn's book, but this is more history that all people, especially Americans, just ought to know. You ought to know. Thomas Jefferson raped Sally Hemings when she was just 14 years old and he was in his 40s. He impregnated her in France, and the infant died after they returned to America. Sally Hemings went on to have 6 more of Jefferson's children while she was enslaved to him. Some historians try to clean up the child rape narrative by saying that it was a love story. Look, she had 6 of his other kids and all that. And I know this is hard to hear. So again, skip ahead a minute if you need to. Okay, but if you penetrate a human who is 14 years old, that is child rape. Also, if you own a person and you are having sex with them, even as an adult, that is rape. You are their owner. They cannot give consent because they have no rights. And this was made official with a quote-unquote high probability by the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation's research committee. And you know that in an instance like this, high probability means he absolutely did that shit.
And Sally Heming, I'm sure, did not own enough property to get out of the way of Thomas Jefferson's wrath. And what I mean by that is to try and become, free from servitude.
Mm-hmm. So just had to get that out of the way. People that really need to know this kind of stuff, just so they can, look at things through a new sort of lens when they consume history like this. So last week we left off giving a nod to Shays' Rebellion and General Henry Knox implying that anybody who doesn't bend the knee to the American government will be killed. General Knox, more like General Cox, am I right? So anyway, we're going to lead off this episode with Alexander Hamilton's political philosophy. Quote, All communities divide themselves into the few and the many. The first are the rich and well-born, the other the mass of the people. The voice of the people has been said to be the voice of God. And however generally this maxim has been quoted and believed, it is not in fact true. The people are turbulent and changing. They seldom judge or determine right. Give therefore to the first class a distinct permanent share in the government. Can a democratic assembly who annually revolve in the mass of the people be supposed steadily to pursue the public good? Nothing but a permanent body can check the imprudence of democracy. So it's like, what's your name, man? Alexander Hamilton. And there's a million people I haven't screwed over. But just you wait. Just you wait.
So we were talking yesterday about how he was. It's such a good play, and Lin-Manuel did such a good job on it. But unfortunately, the character behind the people that he was portraying, the founding fathers didn't have much of a moral compass whatsoever. Real quick, before you jump back into it, yesterday I was telling you. Alexander Hamilton was the last person to be in contact with George Washington via letter. I don't have the information on what was in the letter, but one thing I do know is that Alexander Hamilton was a person who fatally had a problem with honor and an obsession with being foolishly headstrong and combative. And he suggested that the president and Senate were chose for life, which just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And one of the other things I found out, and I've kind of pieced two and two together, he was the founder of the New York Post in November of 1801. So it kind of seemed to me at an early stage in our country's history that they were already preparing to make the media kind of turn on their spin wheel, if you will, or on their turntable as they see fit.
Yeah.
So they were getting an early start on things for that, and just trying to bend the ear of the people into the directions that they wanted them to go. So I just thought I'd throw that in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just a couple facts that I thought would be interesting.
No, that's really interesting. And it's like that song you had me listen to the other day, like the fourth branch of government is the media, right? I mean, again,
it makes sense.
Yeah. And I've talked about Noam Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Consent. All that has to deal with the media that Americans and, a lot of the world consumes, via television. So getting back to Hamilton, he just loves to say the quiet part out loud because, like you said, like he just loves to be combative and is just super, pompous and divisive. So he's just this little ponytail jagoff. So the people rarely determine what is right. So let's let the rich elites have a permanent control over the government. So last week we discussed how 55 white guys, most of whom were lawyers, sat in a room, which must have smelled like colonial ass, and called it the Constitutional Convention. When it was Hamilton's turn, the pontificating windbag that he was suggested a Senate and president chosen for life, like you just alluded to. And again, for life. Like, dude, you just fought and won a war against the country with a king, aka a president for life. Also, the Senate should just be abolished. If we were trying to fix the current government, there should be no Senate and no president. Basically, just have like what body like a parliament. So to reiterate from previous episodes, men with no property, women, the enslaved, Native Americans were not eligible to vote, even in the post-revolution, quote unquote, democracy. And this was just a symptom of the disease, right? The society has clearly already been divided into rich and poor. If one division of society has all of the money, most of the land, the newspapers, the churches, and controls all the educational system, even if you could cast a ballot, does vote even matter? How can your vote penetrate that kind of power?
Like you just said there, does your vote even matter, and how can you even penetrate that kind of power? Just to be perfectly clear, what Rob alluded to, men with no property, women, the enslaved, Native Americans were not eligible to vote. And this was not by mistake. I was speaking earlier about having enough property to perhaps buy their way out of slavery. Well, as we alluded to in many of the episodes prior, that one of the ways to be able to vote was being an aristocrat type of individual who had tons of cash. You had to have a certain amount of property, which 99.9% of the people that are listening in terms of 1800 would not have been able to make those types of numbers, what they thought or deemed a respectable amount for us to matter. So it wasn't like they're saying, hey, even some of the lower class has a chance, or the middle class has a chance. That's not what it was. They were thinking along the lines of the upper 90%. And most of the time it was along the 99%, just like it is today.
That's right. Also, Zinn poses a good question here too. Quote, wasn't it the nature of representative government, even when most broadly based, to be conservative, to prevent tumultuous change? So again, so many parallels to the present. And like Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So again, he specifically asked the question about representative government. So again, a lot of people think that we live in a democracy. Our government is actually a republic. We vote for people to cast votes in our supposed interests. So that's what he's talking about when he means when he specifically calls out representative government. Now, it was time to ratify the Constitution. 9 of the 13 states had to approve it in state conventions to ratify it. Some states had some intense ratification debates, namely New York, where newspapers published at that time anonymous articles now known as the Federalist Papers. And we also know they were written by James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. And I couldn't stop thinking about the musical again. Hamilton wrote the other 51. Yeah, because he was desperate to keep himself and his rich friends in power, so they helped to rig the United States government from the very beginning.
And it can actually vary on how many essays, so to speak, out of the Federalist Papers were penned by Alexander Hamilton, depending on which source you want to go by, because some of them were published anonymously under the name of Publius. Is that it? Publius? I'm not sure the exact pronunciation of that, but
sounds right.
We're assuming, and this is an assumption made by a lot of historians that I found while looking through this, that Publius was also Alexander Hamilton, going by a pseudonym or pen name, if you will, instead of just saying Alexander Hamilton. He tried to be cute and go anonymously because, once again, he had a deadly fear, or excuse me, a deadly penchant for being foolishly headstrong, combative, and just trying to get things his way all the time.
So somehow we know for sure that James Madison wrote Federalist Paper number 10, where he basically is answering Zinn's question earlier about representative governments by pointing out that they're needed to try to keep peace in a society peppered with disputes amongst various factions. And the disputes arose from, quote, the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed I'm sorry. I'm going to cut that and read that again because I can't fucking read. Quote, the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. So the issue for Madison was, how do you control these struggles arising from wealth inequalities? How do you control a majority faction? And magically, the solution is right there in the Constitution. Quote, the solution, an extensive republic. 13 states. It will be more difficult for all who feel it to discover their own strength and to act in unison with each other. The influence of factious leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states, but will be unable to spread a general conflagration through the other states. I'm just like, motherfucker.
Just like motherfucker. The funny thing about James Madison. Mm-hmm. My apologies. I had Thomas Jefferson on the brain. The funny thing about James Madison is he was known for having a voice that was very weak, very uncontrolling. People could rarely hear his speeches. He was also in poor health for most of his life with a condition called bilious fever, and was he was derived by his constituents as a constitutional to sudden attacks of resembling epilepsy. So to go along with everything that James Madison was dealing with when trying to put together essay number 10 in the Federalist Papers, he was known to be essentially a weak man. He had conditions. I'm not sure what bilious fever is, but any type of ailment back in the day did not have, not any type, but most types of ailments back at that time did not have cures. Their medicine was whiskey and cocaine, for Christ's sake. And when I say his constituents considered him to be a little bit weak because he had attacks resembling epilepsy, that's just another thing where people didn't look at him as a very strong man either. They wanted them to be on his side because the numbers matter, but they didn't have the utmost respect for a man who was trying to put his life into the article, or excuse me, into essay 10, but it was short of having very much substance.
Speaking of parallels with the past, I kind of feel this man, like I'm doing it now. Like my voice starts to get shaky when I'm doing public speaking and stuff like that. I don't have the illnesses or whatever, but totally understand the part about having to do public speaking. So the crux of what Madison is saying here is that he wants a government that will have the best interests of the powerful and wealthy few at the top and have these sort of shields up that protect them from any kind of popular revolt among the people. A kind of disorder that will hurt those elites hoarding all the wealth. It just makes sense when you think about the social backgrounds and fiscal interests of the 55 fuckheads who were at the Constitutional Convention.
Yeah, it's oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I was just to say, so now that we have that context, we can see the Constitution through a new lens. This piece of paper isn't some majestic, altruistic work of sensible men trying to create the greatest country to ever exist. No, it's more like the work of selfish assholes trying to protect their privileges, and doing so by giving the people just enough freedoms, or at least the illusion of freedoms, to make sure there was enough support for the superstructure.
And the funny thing about that is that's the way it's been. It's from the beginning of the book to now, it's always been giving the illusion of freedom. We will let you free if you serve 7 years under an indentured servant contract. All you got to do is sign for 7 and then you're gone. Or slaves can earn their freedom if they fight on the side of the Constitution, or excuse me, of the if they fight on the side of the colonials. It's always been that illusion of freedom to spark enough hope in people. And I feel like that we spoke of rape earlier in the show, and while not the same thing, I feel like the hope that was spread amongst the people just trying to be free was another way of raping their conscience of actually having any chance of freedom whatsoever, because they knew along party lines that these people would never have an opportunity to do what they wanted, needed, or strived for, just as people of the new land.
Yeah,
and
no, I totally understand the analogy there. And you mentioned the along party line, so we're gonna get into that a bit right now. So Hamilton was a Federalist, and Madison was a Democratic Republican. He was in the Democratic Republican political party, and both of them helped to make the most bipartisan deal ever to solidify the duopoly, or the two-party system, in the United States from then until now. And unfortunately, for the unforeseeable future as well, when they kept Shays' Rebellion in mind and agreed on this bullshit establishment, quote, to repress domestic faction and insurrection, unquote. So you see, it was never about our freedoms and being the greatest nation the world has ever known. It was about protecting their own wealth and power and comfort. It was about oppression, giving the less fortunate just enough so that they could never organize together to rebel and overthrow this government they created.
There was a very small time in history where the people had a chance to rebel, in my opinion, and I am no historian, where they would have had a fighting chance to overthrow specific people and government to save their freedoms. However, they did not take advantage of that, because there's a lot that goes into it, not just planning, but you're putting your life on your line. You have a family that depends on you, because nobody else can work in there except for the men. So it's such a huge thing to aspire and think about, do we pull the trigger, so to speak, on trying to overthrow these people that we know don't have our best interest in mind, or do we toe the line and hope things get better? Unfortunately, the people missed their opportunities when there was calls to action during the Revolutionary War, in which I think they could have, maybe if they had enough planning and rebellion, could have had a chance at overthrowing and pushing these rich aristocratic fucks out of their land. But once again, it's one of them decisions where you can't blame or say, what the fuck were you thinking? Why did you not take the opportunity when given? Because there was so much on the line: kids, life, wife, land, everything. So once again, it's just a pillaging of the human psyche, and especially the pillaging of hope.
I definitely know what you're saying, and it goes back to what we've discussed before with the Newburgh conspiracy, where they actually marched on Philadelphia, and it got put down by Washington himself. So exactly. I think that's a great point. It definitely could have happened then, and one that I think is glaring was 2020. The pandemic exposed all the bullshit of a capitalist economy. And you had that, and you had with a confluence of the Black Lives Matter movement at the same time. So you had these things like converging, and this, anger from ranging from no healthcare to civil rights. Now, it would have been really hard to organize in such a short amount of time, but that could have been a sort of spontaneous rebellion where the people could have gotten, things that they really wanted, like healthcare. Like, people are like, well, we got the fascists out. Speaking of Trump out of the White House, and we got Ice Cream Joe in there with a majority in the House and Senate, and still can't, pass healthcare. And said
any
like
kind of legislation that's important whatsoever. I mean, anything. I don't want to say that's anything, because I'm sure there's been bills that have passed that have been semi-beneficial to the people. But once again, those are just the little nuanced things to kind of pat you on the back and say, hey, sweetie, there you go. There's a little something for you. Now, if you'll just keep continuing to toe the line, we'd appreciate you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, ever since the $1,400 stimulus, nothing major has happened. I mean, he's
thank you. I've been out of work for 9 months. You've given me $1,400. My landlord is looking at me for the other $7,200 that I still owe him. We appreciate you, though.
Yeah, that's the other thing, and I think we're gonna have to do a special bonus episode to discuss like the parallels of this history and today, because I think it's important. And again, we're facing evictions, the likes of which we've never seen. That it's been lifted, so there's going to be a lot of people in about 4 days that don't have a home. So yeah, not cool. So of course the elites squabbled over exactly how to do this and how to grow their wealth and power, like whether or not to have a strong Senate. Should there be 3 presidents, like some sort of executive board? Who should be president, if there even should be any kind of president? And if there is a president, how long should he be president, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially, the money-moving financial institution lovers of the North and the slaveholders of the South came to a sort of constitutional compromise that would unite the 13 states into one great big market for commerce. the compromise was that the North wanted laws that regulated interstate commerce that would pass only with the majority of Congress. And the South said, so long as we can keep trading slaves for another 20 years or so before it gets outlawed, then we Gucci.
Unbelievable. Like, I don't know. Continue. I apologize. I was just going to say something I've said 150,000 fucking times on these podcasts, but anybody that's listening now has already heard it. So
that's right. So historians like Charles Beard, who we mentioned before, who studied the Constitution and representative governments, tried to warn people that governments, including especially the United States government, are not neutral, meaning that they do, in fact, protect and represent the economic interest of the wealthy elites.
Which is not a surprise, like, or Houdini hopping out of a cake or some shit. It's just fucking obvious.
Jumping out of a cake. So why then did cohorts like mechanics, brewers, tailors, blacksmiths, etc., that would have made up a workers' party so enthusiastic about a constitution that overwhelmingly favored the rich and powerful, so much so that they organized a damn parade complete with banners and floats? And it's because they had to protect their goods and services from foreign competition. Also, and this is related, because they were nationalists. So while a lot of workers despised elitist rule, it was incumbent that they support a government that protected them against goods such as British shoes and hats that came spilling into the States shortly after the Revolution.
Exactly. I mean, if you were one of these people, brewers, tailors, blacksmiths, you had to fear specific goods being brought over from Britain or France or anywhere that it could have been imported or exported without you getting your fair share or your cut when you're growing on homeland. Mm-hmm. And I think it was an especially I was going to say, I think it's an especially distasteful thing to once again dangle the carrot in front of these people. But at this point, it's just elitist rule. It's something you've grown to expect. And why did they fall in line and enjoy the parade and the banners and the floats? Well, some people just really enjoy balloons, I guess. I don't know.
The Constitution became even more popular once it was amended to include the Bill of Rights. They were specifically written for a groundswell of support for the new government. The Bill of Rights, of course, contained everybody's favorite individual liberties, and I think these were the carrots that you just mentioned, like the right to bear arms. But I want to talk about 1A, freedom of religion, speech, press, and petition, specifically the speech part. So from Zinn, I'm gonna have to cut this out. I was like going along in my book, and now all of a sudden I somehow lost my spot. It says the First Amendment. Quote, the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, passed in 1791 by Congress, it provided that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Yet 7 years after the First Amendment became part of the Constitution, Congress passed a law very clearly abridging the freedom of speech. This was the Sedition Act of 1798, passed under John Adams's administration. The Sedition Act made it a crime to say or write anything, quote unquote, false, scandalous, or malicious against the government, Congress, or the president with intent to defame them, bring them into disrepute, or excite popular hatreds against them. This act seemed to directly violate the First Amendment, yet it was enforced. 10 Americans were put in prison for utterances against the government, and every member of the Supreme Court in 1798 through 1800, sitting as an appellate judge, held it constitutional. How, this is me talking now, how unbelievably fragile must you and your government be? You just passed the Bill of Rights 7 years ago, where the 1A says you have freedom of speech. But now it's you can't talk shit about the government or you'll be put in prison.
And the funny thing about that is the Bill of Rights was made specifically for one reason. And that was not to appease the masses and make changes to the Constitution, but to make it acceptable through the lens of the public. Like, okay, they're making some tiny changes. Maybe they do care for us once and for all, or maybe they do care for us after all, I guess is the better way for. But essentially, all the Bill of Rights did was create a nice little woven bag of wool to put over your eyes. And that's essentially what the Bill of Rights was created. And then 7 years later, they make the amendment and try to take down freedom of speech. And the Sedition Act was not only for Americans who spoke ill of the government and president or in a negative fashion, but it was also Irishmen and the French as well that were quote unquote talking shit, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the Irish and French revolutions were happening around the same time. So that stoked some fear in the elites. So and this just reminds me of like George Carlin says, they only want obedient workers. Don't look at the actual laws behind this stuff. Don't dig into it too much. Just do the job that we're telling you to do, and be happy with what capitalism gives you.
I don't mean to tie something into myself, but since the beginning of my work life, when I was 16 years old in 96, I've been told that I have a bad attitude, and it's because of one specific reason. I always speak out against things that I deem stupid or outlandish and ludicrous. So when George Carlin was saying obedient workers, that's all we want, obedient workers. Anytime you speak your mind, even if you do it in a respectful manner, they're going to tag you, label you, or put a target on your back saying, yeah, watch out for this one. So
that's right. Yep.
If you did not toe the line, you were going to be a target at some point for some type of retaliation, if you will.
Yeah. And again, another parallel, and we'll put this in the bonus episode that we do later this week, but Governor DeSantis of Florida passed a law basically saying that you can't protest. So when there was a BLM protest, they shut it down. But when there was a basically like a Proud Boys rally, there was no problem for them to go out there and protest whatever it was. I want to say it was like transgender rights. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. So the book then gets a little bit into the weeds regarding prior restraint and then Congress's power to tax and appropriate money. But I do have to quickly mention the whiskey tax. First, a little context. Alexander Hamilton was Washington's Secretary of Treasury, and he got laws passed to establish a national bank because he needed to transfer even more wealth from the poor to the elites by taxing poor farmers to pay for war bonds that were held by a tiny group of rich folks. So this especially hurt yeoman farmers who grew grain, which of course was transformed and sold as whiskey. So in 1794, Western Pennsylvania farmers had enough of the bullshit and revolted against the tax collections. Hamilton, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, led U.S. troops himself to put down the whiskey rebellion.
I think you could have said the risky whiskey rebellion.
Why are you saying it that way? Saying what way? Whiskey.
Yeah, because it essentially was for the farmers a risky whiskey rebellion because they were trying to make money in one of the few ways by not only selling goods and products, but their side hustles, if you will, which everybody appreciates. Tip of the cap to you, whiskey makers. Obviously, corn and grain is used when you're putting in your still. You mix that with water and fermentation, and that's how it all comes about. And they're taking that away from them. So when you have a chance to make even a little extra cash, the United States was trying to stick its fingers right up the farmer's ass again.
I mean, whiskey was used for, like you said, like so much.
It's medicinal. At this point, I'm not even making fun of it because cocaine and whiskey, if that was considered medicinal purposes in 1794, A, why are you taking it away? And B, I would have been the healthiest man in the history of the earth.
I mean, I was just going to mention that whiskey, they also used it to, you could sterilize things with it because it's alcohol. But they also used it to preserve things, especially food. Like you could stick corn in whiskey and then you can have it throughout the winter. It doesn't go bad. It acts as a preserve. Whiskey flavored corn needs to make a comeback.
It also acted as an anesthesia in certain cases. Obviously not an inhalant, but a way to kind of sedate somebody who was going through a tough, if maybe they were shot or accidentally had a injury while on their own farm. That was used as a sedation method to try and keep the pain down when being operated on. So there was tons of different reasons outside of getting shit-faced to keep whiskey flowing freely. And the farmers of Western Pennsylvania realized that. And they also realized their wallets were being struck hard. So I appreciate the attempt, even though Alexander Hamilton came in and fucked shit up again.
I mean, and I know they had like the original formula of Coca-Cola literally had cocaine in it.
Correct.
But I guess you don't want to, mix them up. You don't want to be doing rails of whiskey. So,
I mean, if you had a Jack and Coke back then, you were probably looked at like doctor.
So we will close things out like we usually do as we wrap up a chapter with a Zinn quote. The Constitution then illustrates the complexity of the American system, that it serves the interests of a wealthy elite, but also does enough for small property owners, for middle-income mechanics and farmers to build a broad base of support. The slightly prosperous people who make up this base of support are buffers against the blacks, the Indians, and the very poor whites. They enable the elite to keep control with a minimum of coercion, a maximum of law, all made palatable by the fanfare of patriotism and unity. God damn.
Yeah.
He nails it every time. That word, the word patriotism makes me like feel queasy now, because it's just like, oh, he's a patriot, she's a patriot, and it's just like, no. And he uses the word unity here, and a lot of people, it's a good word to try to, bring people together. You want to unify, you want unity, but in most cases, I don't want unity. I want solidarity. I want people to, try to go for the same goals that I want to reach, to help make things better for other people. I don't want to just unify and say, we have these differences, but let's come together because we happen to live in the same, space time. Like, no, I want to actually try to make things better for people who are just struggling. And again, if you can, look up mutual aid for evictions. They're going to expire. The moratorium on evictions is going to expire. The appellate court just deemed that the CDC eviction moratorium was unconstitutional. So they're happily kicking people out of their homes, people who could not work because of a pandemic. So again, if you have the capacity, look it up and try to donate what you can, in your local area, and just things are going to get really fucking bad really quickly.
And let's just be honest. Who are we bullshitting when we think that the opportunity for betterment could be on the horizon when we continue to have a minimum wage of $7.25? And I don't know if people saw the CNN article, which was recently spread throughout many different news sites afterwards, but it spoke specifically on people that make minimum wage cannot afford to live with a rent of a specific amount in any city in the United States. And is it really that hard to believe? I mean,
no,
it's not. And I don't make anything close to minimum wage, and I struggle ridiculously to make ends meet, which I fucking despise that term, because it seems like I'll be trying to make ends meet until I'm of age to retire, and then my pension will be so small because I haven't made anything in my life that I'm going to have to try and make ends meet during retirement. And if I can't at least golf every day during retirement, somebody's getting shot. That's not a threat. That's a promise.
Good place to end it. So
actually, I got one more thing to say real quick. It's like, and one of the people behind like these atrocities is the submoronic people like Ted Cruz. And he's sitting there with supportive words for he's sitting there with supportive words for people that have made a name for themselves through capitalism. And I appreciate the fact that what certain people do are great ideas. But I don't know.
I mean, if you're talking about Jeff Bezos, like it's not the most intuitive thing to think of. Hey, let's sell books, but online. Like it kind of got lucky with that one. Somebody was going to do it, and if you need to exploit workers to get where you're at, to be on your way to being a trillionaire, I don't know. There should be no billionaires at all.
I had a moment of clarity. What I'm trying to fucking say is this: Ted Cruz gets mad at the people, especially the immigrants and hardworking citizens of America that come over and try and make a living for themselves, whether it's at that 725 or if it's even less for some Mexican Americans down in his little area, neck of the woods. Mm-hmm. But Ted, let me remind you about pulling wool over your eyes. Your real fucking name is Raphael, you cunt. And you started going by Ted so people would have more respect for you in your area, your neck of the woods. So you didn't look like exactly what you are. So go fuck yourself.
Woo. More part of, people just playing the game. It's not, nothing about these people is honorable or trustworthy. It's all part of the political game. So, like I said last week, at the risk of sounding eloquent, let's do a general strike.
General strike.
Good night.
Fuck you, Raphael.